US fighters scramble to intercept a fast-moving jet.
Everybody knew that there was a major problem.
Stand by. I can't quite see.
But this is not a combat mission.
Our job is to try to figure out what's wrong with that airplane.
It's a mid-air emergency.
47 Bravo Alpha, Jacksonville. Please acknowledge.
A private Learjet is hundreds of miles off course.
For some reason, though, that crew is not communicating with air traffic control, and we need to find that out.
Can he see anything in the cockpit?
The aircraft was flying toward a large metropolitan area.
Get me someone from the Learjet. I need to know how long this plane can stay in the air.
If it went down in those areas, there'd be mass casualties.
It's 8:30 a.m. at Orlando International Airport.
Nav
On.
radios.
The pilots of a private Learjet run through their pre-flight checks.
Are set.
They're preparing for some high-profile passengers.
And we're ready for taxi.
Just in time. Here's the man himself. Morning.
Pro golfer Payne Stewart is on his way to Dallas with some close business associates.
Sure, the target area is wide, but you miss, the bunker's gonna eat you alive.
Payne Stewart is one of the most colorful characters in the game of golf.
At 42, Stewart is in the middle of a comeback year. He's just won the US Open, one of the most important dates on the tour. But he's almost as famous for his trademark wardrobe as he is for his golfing.
Payne Stewart was loud, he was outgoing, he was engaging. His dad always wore really colorful blazers. He always told Payne, you want to stand out. So Payne said, I'm going to wear knickers, +4s, and a flat cap. So even people who didn't follow golf knew who he was by how he dressed.
Let me show you my idea for that bunker.
Payne Stewart hopes his future in golf will go beyond playing the game. He has big plans for building a new course at the Dallas University where he honed his skills as an amateur.
There were 3 other people with him in the plane in addition to the pilots. He had Van Arden, who was his agent, along with Robert Fraley, also his agent, and Bruce Borland, who was a member of the Jack Nicklaus Design Group.
This hole is gonna be tough. It's over 500 yards.
Stewart flies regularly on the Learjet, a plane that takes its name from the man who designed it.
Bill Lear was working on a fighter jet design for the Swiss, and when they decided not to build that airplane, he took that design, brought it back to the US, and built the Learjet.
47 Bravo Alpha, you are cleared for takeoff.
You ready? Okay, here we go, and takeoff thrust.
Captain Michael Kling is well qualified to fly this high-performance machine. He's a former Air Force pilot and flight instructor.
A lot of pilots came out of the Air Force and started flying Learjets because it reminded them and gave them that performance that they were used to. It was like the Ferrari or the Porsche business jets.
P1.
First Officer Stephanie Bolagarig has less than 100 hours in the Lear. She's keen to log more flight time.
Rotate.
At 9:19 a.m., the Learjet lifts off.
Good morning, Jacksonville. This is Learjet 47 Bravo Alpha, climbing to flight level 260.
The crew contacts Jacksonville Air Traffic Control.
Good morning, 47 Bravo Alpha. Climb and maintain flight level 390.
Wesley Cooch was one of the controllers on duty that day.
The crew of the Learjet was extremely professional, cheerful, nothing out of the ordinary at all. A typical, hello, how are you, verify your altitude, course, etc.
Learjet 47 Bravo Alpha, roger that, Jacksonville. Climb and maintain flight level 390.
The controller clears the jet to keep climbing all the way to 39,000 feet.
The Learjet generally flies higher than the commercial airliners.
By flying at high altitudes where the air is thin, the Lear saves on fuel.
Well, you get a better economy. So you're getting from point A to point B, costing you less.
The flight plan calls for the airplane to fly northwest towards Cross City, Florida, then turn west and fly direct to Dallas. 14 minutes after takeoff, the Learjet has traveled 80 miles. It's time to pass control of the plane to a new air traffic controller.
Air traffic control is a series of what we call handoffs. And that means that it's time for him to cross to somebody else's sector.
47 Bravo Alpha, contact Jack Center at 135.65.
The pilots need to change to a different radio frequency to talk to the next controller.
47 Bravo Alpha, please acknowledge.
There's no answer.
There's nothing really unusual about missing a frequency change. It's early, just after takeoff. I assume they're trying to get everything buttoned up and taken care of. It really wasn't that alarming.
47 Bravo Alpha, contact Jack Center on 135.65.
In the back of your mind, all controllers know I didn't get an acknowledgement for that frequency change. So you give her a moment, you go on about your business, then you come back to the aircraft. You try it again.
47 Bravo Alpha, this is Jack Center.
What's up?
It's that Learjet. It's not answering.
Maybe he's off frequency.
There's a plethora of reasons where an aircraft can miss a call.
Let's see if it levels off when it's supposed to.
The Learjet has nearly reached its approved cruising altitude of 39,000 feet.
They're still climbing.
Let me see their flight plan.
When it climbed through 39,000 feet, everybody knew that there was a major, major problem.
We've got a turn coming across city.
Let's hope they make that turn. I'm gonna try again on the other frequency. 47 Bravo Alpha, Jacksonville, please acknowledge.
At the same time, pilots of other planes in the area also try to contact the Learjet.
47 Bravo Alpha, come in.
It's kind of a band of brothers thing among pilots that if something is beginning to go wrong, perhaps you can step in safely and remedy a situation. If the Lear's radios were failing but not failed, then perhaps a relay could be set up to communicate with the aircraft from the ground.
Any pilot, do you have contact with the Learjet?
Negative. Nothing from the Learjet.
It's been 20 minutes since Payne Stewart's plane left Orlando. Controllers watch nervously as it approaches Cross City. It's a critical moment. They know that any second now, the Learjet is supposed to turn west towards Dallas.
The tension level was so high, you could hear a pin drop.
Damn it.
It's not making a course correction. There was something terribly wrong.
This is Jacksonville Center. I'm declaring an emergency.
We're all kind of in shock and disbelief at this aircraft.
Ben's in here.
Experts at the National Transportation Safety Board are notified of the escalating emergency.
Give me a map.
Once the air traffic control system realized the aircraft had gone rogue, so to speak, the next step is to try to figure out why. It's either being hijacked or it's malfunctioned, the crew has been incapacitated somehow.
This is where they are now.
Controllers scramble F-16 fighters to track down the wayward Learjet.
Is the crew incapacitated? Is there something wrong with the aircraft? For some reason, though, that crew is not communicating with air traffic control. So our job is to go up and find out why.
The situation is growing more urgent. The runaway plane has been out of contact for more than an hour, and it's about to fly over the densely populated area around Memphis.
Get me someone from Learjet. I need to know how long this plane can stay in the air.
The aircraft was flying toward a large metropolitan area. The question became, well, if it went out of control or ran out of gas over Memphis, what would happen?
Learjet investigator Jim Tidball is immediately recruited to the team.
Where is it right now?
His first task is to determine how far the plane can get with the amount of fuel on board.
I need performance data on the 35 ASAP.
When the airplane didn't make its turn, it continued on towards Memphis. And after Memphis, it was headed towards St. Louis. And after St. Louis, again towards Minneapolis. Those were all major metropolitan areas. If it went down in those areas, there'd be mass casualties.
A small private jet on a routine flight has turned into a national emergency.
We have a developing story, as you may have heard. There is a civilian Learjet.
News of a rogue Learjet flying hundreds of miles off course has captivated the nation.
Turn that up, would you?
The Air Force is simply saying
NTSB investigators keep a close eye on the media coverage.
they attempt to find out what's
We began assembling our launch team and monitoring the situation on television like a lot of folks in the United States.
It did take a full load of fuel on when it...
So it became a kind of a weird situation for us.
There's some good news. The plane has cleared Memphis airspace.
At least it didn't hit the city.
But the crisis is far from over. Controllers still have no idea why the plane is not responding. And there are more urban centers in the Learjet's path. If it doesn't change course soon, the fighter jets may be forced to take drastic measures.
If the decision came out that they were to take the airplane out instead of allowing it to go towards a metropolitan area, that decision would have to come from the White House.
The FAA began tracking an aircraft in distress. The president was made aware of this situation this morning in a meeting with his economic advisors.
Okay, I think I got something.
Jim Tidball has come up with a rough calculation of where the plane will run out of fuel.
ATC kept giving the team real-time data as to where the airplane was, the heading that it was flying, etc. So we always knew where the airplane was, and calculating the fuel burn at those altitudes, we could figure how far it was going to go.
My best guess is South Dakota, possibly North Dakota. I can't say more than that.
Let's hope he's right. With any luck, they won't hit anything.
That's the scary part of the whole equation here. Is it going to hit a house? Is it going to go down in a town? Big Midwest, but anything could be possible.
In the air, the F-16 pilots have caught up with the rogue plane.
Sam, I can't quite see.
Once we made the intercept, our job is to figure out what's going on with the airplane. We'll visually look at the airplane.
No damage.
There was no panels missing. There was no gas leaking, for instance. There was no any other fluids leaking. There was no obvious exterior damage.
The fighter pilots are desperate for some way to communicate with the Learjet's crew, so they attempt a risky aerial maneuver.
I'm going to try and wake them up.
Maybe, by flying through their jet wash or the turbulence is caused by the lead fighter in this case, they would get some reaction out of them. You're hoping you get some movement.
But it's no use. The Lear does not respond.
Can he see anything in the cockpit?
Stand by, I'm gonna go take a closer look.
But Colonel Olson isn't giving up. Even though his F-16 is designed to fly at much higher speeds, he wrestles it closer to get a better look.
Flying F-16 at low airspeed can be difficult, especially at high altitudes. It's very strange sitting next to him, wondering what's going on inside the aircraft.
The windows of the aircraft provide an ominous clue.
No movement and the windows covered in frost.
When the report came back that the windshield seemed to be iced over on the inside and that the cabin windows were all dark, that gave us pause for concern.
If the people are conscious, they'd be trying to scrape away that condensation so they could see. So if you see no attempt to get rid of that condensation, your mind goes, what's the condition of the crew and the passengers that are on board of the aircraft?
The grim reality of the situation sets in.
The frosted over windscreen and a darkened cockpit and cabin indicated that the crew was probably no longer with us.
The Lear jet is now a ghost plane.
Can we narrow down the crash site anymore?
With no hope for the passengers and crew, the only focus now is on where the plane will come down.
As NTSB investigators, we're very interested in where the aircraft would crash, obviously, because we had to get there as soon as we could.
But all they can do is wait and watch.
To hear the news of Payne likely being on that plane was very shocking. It didn't seem real. He was just winning the U.S. Open and grabbing Phil Mickelson's face and hoisting a trophy up.
After nearly 4 hours in the air, the Lear jet is approaching Aberdeen, South Dakota.
Got it. It could go down any time.
According to calculations, the jet is almost out of fuel. At 10 minutes past 12, it happens.
One of the engines just flamed out and it started turning. I said something like, look out, the aircraft is turning. We don't know where this aircraft is going to go, but it's starting to move.
The Lear jet carrying Payne Stewart and 5 other people is falling from the sky.
They're going down, they're going down.
Where's it gonna hit?
The F-16 attempts to follow, but the plane disappears into the clouds. It drops below the radar.
Center, I've got a crash site.
We all felt like we were pretty much just kicked in the guts, couldn't do anything. So it was a pretty bad day.
Payne Stewart's Learjet has slammed into a hayfield in South Dakota. There are no survivors.
You have human beings on that aircraft. They have a life, they have a family, they have a connection, they have a story. And you're part of the end of their story, unfortunately. So if you look back on it, it's a very, very sad deal.
It's over.
I think there was a sense of relief when the airplane actually did go down in a rural area that it did not impact a major metropolitan area.
This is where the plane went down after its 1,500-mile, 4-hour flight halfway across the nation. On board, golfer Payne Stewart, 2-time U.S. Open champ.
The guys get to know each other really well. It is a tight-knit community with the media, with the players, with the families. And for someone from that family to be taken away in such tragic fashion was really saddening.
In Brown County, South Dakota, the crash has shaken local residents.
And after a few flips and flops and everything, it went straight down, and it took probably 12 seconds to hit the ground.
For crash investigators, the first step is to survey the impact area and lay out a search grid.
Nice and slow. We don't want to miss a thing.
The grid-type search was the way to proceed, so we knew where we had been, what we had covered, and then we could move on to the next grid section. To us, it was very important, so we knew where we could walk, where we couldn't walk.
The 500-mile-an-hour impact hasn't just smashed the wreckage. It's driven most of it into the ground.
The aircraft at the accident site was completely destroyed in pieces, and there were a lot of very small pieces.
My first impression was we're going to have a little trouble gathering evidence here.
At the Learjet crash site, investigators dig through layers of earth. They search every inch of soil for wreckage.
It almost became an archaeological dig, kind of unlayering the thing as we went down through the earth.
A good investigator can't make decisions based on initial information. You have to have all the data before you can do an adequate job.
As key pieces are recovered, investigators map out the position of the plane. They want to find the tail, and with it, the cockpit voice recorder.
As we were looking through the debris in the crater, we started finding pieces that were close to the cockpit voice recorder. We knew we were looking in the right area. We felt confident that we'd find the CVR.
Meanwhile, Bob Benson of the National Transportation Safety Board is piecing together what they know so far.
Okay, let's see what we got.
The lengthy pursuit of the flight has given him an unusual head start on the case.
For an investigator to realize that an accident is going to occur before it happened is very unusual. It's a strange feeling, a sad feeling, to know an accident's going to occur, and you pack your bags early for once instead of later.
The engines were okay.
The F-16 folks were gathering data like both engines were running. They could see 2 contrails. It had some electrical power because navigation and rotating beacon lights were going on.
And the electrical was working. So what else do we know?
The F-16 pilots also noticed some unusual fluctuations in the Learjet's altitude before it crashed.
Stand by. I'm going to take a closer look.
The Learjet was bobbing up and down in a steady rhythm known as porpoising.
That probably was because the autopilot was set in a climb mode, and the aircraft was attempting to climb as high as it possibly could. But aerodynamically, there's a limit to that. And so it would get up to its very maximum ceiling and then go down and try to go back up and go down again.
No pilot would deliberately fly a plane this way.
I think they were unconscious, or worse, when the jets got the visual.
There's another lead Benson urgently wants to pursue.
No movement, and the window's covered in frost.
The F-16 folks told us that there was a large area of frost, in fact covering 90% more of the front windscreens of the aircraft. on the inside. That obviously indicates that at some point things got very, very cold inside. So it wasn't an answer to all our questions, but it led us quickly to think that there may have been a pressurization problem on board.
Investigators may be a step closer to finding answers. They've recovered the cockpit voice recorder.
Good work.
The only recording device on board.
The CVR was pretty smashed when we recovered it, and there was concern that we'd get nothing off of it.
I only hope we hear something that tells us what went wrong.
It was sent back immediately to the NTSB lab, and they did a fantastic job of piecing this thing together and getting data out of the CVR.
Okay, let's hear it.
The recording captures sounds during the last 30 minutes of flight. As they listen, investigators make a disturbing discovery. No one on board is talking at all.
It was eerie because the airplane is flying, and there is no voice whatsoever.
But there are other sounds, and if they can be identified, they could provide vital clues.
Turn that up, please.
We can hear warnings in the cockpit, buzzers, things like that. So even though no voices are heard, there's valuable stuff on those.
That's the cabin altitude warning. We're definitely looking at a loss of pressure accident.
The recording confirms Benson's hunch. The plane suffered some sort of decompression failure. The higher the altitude, the lower the air pressure gets.
Good morning, Jacksonville. This is Learjet 47 Bravo Alpha climbing to flight level 260.
Above 10,000 feet, the air outside is so thin that the cabin air must be pressurized so that pilots and passengers can get enough oxygen to breathe. Pressurization prevents the life-threatening condition called hypoxia. Dr. Mitchell Garber is an expert on just how quickly hypoxia can incapacitate a pilot.
You've got maybe 4 or 5 seconds worth of actual oxygen in your brain, and then another 12 to 15 seconds in your circulation. Once all that is gone, things are going to go very horribly awry for you very, very quickly.
The evidence paints a chilling picture.
The cabin altitude warning horn was blaring for the entire 30 minutes, minus a few seconds at the end.
The mystery now is, why did Payne Stewart's Learjet lose vital cabin pressure? And why didn't the emergency alarm prevent the catastrophe?
Not much to go on.
The search of the crash site turns up very little of the pressurization system, just a couple of damaged valves.
The positive thing to do is work with what you have. You go to war with what you have, not with what you wish had.
The flow control valve regulates how much air is drawn from the engines into the cabin. A problem with this valve could cause a depressurization.
Even though components are heavily damaged, it's part of our training and our job to try as hard as we can to determine what the component was doing prior to the crash.
Let's see what this can tell us.
Benson examines the valve under a high-powered microscope. He makes an important discovery. Small scratches in the metal.
At impact, parts hit parts and internal components hit internal components, and those cause witness marks. You could almost consider it to be a snapshot of what would happen at impact.
Bingo.
The witness marks indicated quite definitely that the valve was closed during the horrendous impact of the aircraft and the ground.
With the flow control valve closed, there would have been no airflow to maintain cabin pressure.
We've got a cabin altitude warning.
The discovery that the flow control valve was closed was a big deal for us. Now we were getting close to why the accident occurred.
Setting the valve correctly is a routine part of every takeoff.
Either the thing broke, or the crew took off without setting it.
Let's see what these turn up.
To check for mechanical failure, investigators need more pieces from the mechanism that opens and closes the valves. They step up search efforts at the crash site.
We bought and rented metal detectors, and people were out there on their hands and knees, sifting through dirt with screens to try to find these components.
Investigators fill crates with recovered parts.
Any more wreckage from the pressurization system?
But the valve mechanism is never recovered.
When we find a clue and we can't follow it all the way to the end, it gets very frustrating for investigators. We know we've got a piece of the evidence, but not all the evidence.
Play it from the top. I want to hear something she said before takeoff.
Benson turns to air traffic control recordings that captured all radio calls with the Learjet's crew.
Orlando Tower 47 Bravo Alpha requesting taxi.
He hopes the recordings can tell him when the Learjet began to decompress. The air used to pressurize the plane comes from the engines, so it can feel a bit hot. That's why some pilots wait until the last minute before opening the airflow valve.
V1?
Did they forget to do this?
Rotate.
Good morning, 47 Bravo Alpha. Climb and maintain flight level 390.
If they did forget to open the crucial valve at takeoff, they would have been affected by a lack of oxygen as soon as they climbed past 10,000 feet.
The progression of hypoxia symptoms is probably most pronounced in the mental arena, in our ability to think, our ability to make determinations. It's one of the reasons it's so critical.
Benson listens carefully to the voices. He wants to compare how the pilots sound on the ground with how they sound at higher altitudes where there's less oxygen.
It was important for us to try to figure out at what altitude, what point in the flight, really, something began to go wrong.
So far, so good. Play me something from later, after they climb past 10,000 feet.
Changes in their voices could reveal when the pressure failed.
You may get slurred speech as you do with intoxication. You may get slower speech as you do with intoxication.
Good morning, Jacksonville. This is 47 Bravo Alpha. Climbing to flight level 260.
She sounds the same to me. So everything's fine up to that last radio call.
Transmissions from the first officer were clear, so we knew at that altitude things were going fine.
Radios
are set.
The timing tells Benson that the crew set the valve correctly at takeoff.
cabin air switch.
Normal.
Something happened between their last radio call here and when they lost radio contact here.
We had good transmissions from the flight crew, clear, without oxygen masks on, at an altitude of 28,000 feet. And 4 minutes later, as the aircraft was passing through 36,000 feet, air traffic control could not contact them. So that led us to believe that something pretty darned important happened between those two altitudes in that 4-minute window.
Something must have happened to close the cabin air valve, but it's impossible to say whether it was human error or mechanical failure.
Because of the chaotic nature of airplane accidents, You don't have a lot of clues sometimes, but that doesn't mean that we stop investigating.
Cabin altitude warning.
There's another baffling mystery. The Learjet is equipped with emergency oxygen masks.
Masks on.
Masks on.
No matter what caused the loss of pressure, the oxygen masks should have given the crew enough air to breathe until they could land the plane.
If a crew happened to get an altitude warning, gosh, the first thing any flight crew should do would be to don an oxygen mask.
Can't breathe. Can you breathe? I think.
Could the emergency oxygen system have somehow failed? Benson scours the Learjet's maintenance records.
Looks like everything was working fine.
He discovers that on several previous flights, the Learjet's crew used the masks without any problems.
We did determine that the oxygen was on board and the crew could have used it. So now the question became, why didn't they use supplemental oxygen?
Time to take a new approach. Set us to climb, please.
Investigators need to learn more about what happened on board the Learjet after the crew's last radio call. They hope a simulation of the flight will help.
There goes the cabin altitude warning. Start the clock.
You've got maybe 15 seconds to do something once you become in a environment that's almost eliminated with oxygen.
Emergency checklist. Got it.
Benson scans the same type of checklist binder used by the Learjet pilots. What he's about to discover could finally unravel the mystery and reveal why Payne Stewart's Learjet tumbled from the skies over South Dakota.
I think all of us sort of had in our heads the checklist will have, once you hear the altitude warning horn or any other indication of a decompression event, that you're going to put your oxygen mask on as the first and immediate action item.
The simulated loss of cabin pressure leads Benson to an astounding discovery. The first item on the emergency checklist is not don oxygen masks.
At 10,000 plus or minus 500 feet cabin altitude, control pressure to the outflow valve is trapped.
Some of the wording at first glance was quite confusing. And I imagine it would be very confusing if you were under a distress situation and trying to figure out exactly what the checklist meant.
This deactivates the automatic mode and stops cabin altitude from rising higher if the failure is in the automatic control system. I can't believe we still haven't put our oxygen masks on.
We were surprised because it implied pretty strongly that you need to troubleshoot a pressurization problem, and if you can't fix it, then you don your oxygen masks. And that's counterintuitive to us. That was backwards, in fact. The first step should have been don oxygen masks.
Okay, shut it down. I think I know what happened.
Investigators now have a theory about what went wrong on board the Learjet.
Everything is fine until about 24,000 feet. Then something causes the plane to lose pressure.
We've got a cabin altitude warning.
Emergency checklist.
They reach for their checklist and start to troubleshoot.
What does the checklist say?
At 10,000 plus or minus 500 feet, have an altitude control pressure to the outflow valve is trapped.
They picked up a checklist, read it, were confused by it, and the oxygen masks were sitting there unused.
Could it be the bleed air?
This deactivates the automatic mode and stops cabin altitude from rising higher if the failure is in the automatic control system.
What please?
Hypoxia sets in with devastating speed. After 15 seconds, the crew would be confused and disoriented.
Read that again?
Okay,
A lot of it depends on how rapid the onset of hypoxia is, and a lot of it depends on the individual. But things that we tend to see fairly commonly, and probably the most important one, is the difficulty in thinking.
At 10,000, control pressure.
Thought patterns becoming more confused and less deliberate. You actually start to lose consciousness. And if you don't get oxygen delivered back to you, eventually you're going to die from oxygen starvation.
But before they can solve the problem, the crew loses consciousness.
The Lear checklist, in a sense, a very real sense, could lead a crew astray.
Without those masks on, they wouldn't stand a chance.
Instead of a loud warning horn, maybe a statement from the airplane that says, "Put on your oxygen mask," would be more effective, rather than having people who are having to try and figure out what the sound is, having to deal with the sound itself, and then having to try and figure out what they're supposed to do about it.
In the aftermath of the Learjet tragedy, Payne Stewart's family and friends, along with golf fans across the nation, come together in mourning.
I am profoundly sorry for the loss of Payne Stewart, who has had such a remarkable career and impact on his sport.
I knew Payne as a carefree guy who was nice to everybody and was very open-hearted.
Payne wouldn't have wanted a lot of mourning over his death, however it happened. He was an upbeat guy. He was a happy guy who just loved living life, being with his family, having a good time. And he wouldn't want people mourning. He wanted people celebrating his life and being there for his family.
B1, rotate.
Investigators are never able to determine conclusively what caused the plane to lose pressure.
The decompression could have been caused by a leaky seal on a door, a small leak about the size of a pencil in the side of the aircraft, malfunction within the system. So we don't know.
But whatever the reason, the crew would likely have recovered if they'd put their masks on.
The NTSB in its report ultimately concluded that had they received oxygen in a timely manner, it's likely that we would not be talking about this particular accident today.
Got a cabin altitude warning?
Emergency checklist.
Following the investigation, the NTSB recommends important changes to aviation checklists.
We asked very strongly that that checklist that we suspected got the crew in trouble, the checklist be changed to make it clearer and more useful in an emergency.
The FAA is quick to respond. Don oxygen masks is now the first item on the checklist, not just for Learjets, but for every similar plane in the sky.
We were pleased with the results. The checklist was changed, again, not only for the Lear, but the FAA insisted that other aircraft, other business jets, recheck their checklist to make sure they made sense.
I think the most important takeaway for me is to understand your emergency checklist. There are emergency checklists for a reason. That's to keep you safe.